have like this final module. I'm going to go through very, very fast, and then we're going to talk about what's happening next week. And so hopefully you will stick until the end. Okay. All this stuff we are talking about today of how to improve your presentation skills are very, very useful when it comes to interaction design, because oftentimes in interaction design we conduct what we call design reviews or design evaluations. These are like specific times in the product cycle development where the designers and all the other stakeholders actually come together and they need to decide what to do in the next cycle of the development iteration. Okay, and so I'm going to talk for a few minutes about these design reviews so that you know what happens during these design reviews, what to expect, and what to conduct them at their take the best out of them. So first of all, the goal of the design review is to convince your stakeholders, the decision makers in your company, that whatever you are proposing as design recommendations is the best you can do and you should do basically moving forward. Okay, so you basically need to provide the rationale for the choice that you are suggesting, and so a typical number of things that you do in this presentation is to back up your ideas with research, because as we mentioned multiple times, research gives additional strength, builds like trust with your stakeholder, and so you are showing that you came to this conclusion following the user-centric development process. You put like the people, the users of your technology at the center of your design process. You should also list the pros and cons of alternative design. Oftentimes, I mean, we reach out these design reviews and we have multiple ideas, and we need to choose with your team, with the other stakeholders, which one to pursue further in the development lifecycle. And finally, you can use design principle to back up your rationale, because obviously these are well-known principles. We know that they work because there has been like extensive research on these points. And so if we stick to the design principles, we are oftentimes on the right, okay? And so this is also true for next week's presentation, by the way. If you can make references to design principles, that's a plus, okay? I told this multiple times today, show, don't tell. Your opinion is very, very important, obviously, because you are the designers. You have been working on this for 14 weeks. So you guys have spent an enormous amount of hours thinking about this project, right? But obviously that's not enough. As stakeholders, we want also the facts that are coming from research. So statistics, quotes, videos of people struggling with something. All of this is very, very powerful to support your statements. If you can show the comparisons with the alternative design and explain the pros and cons of your solution, this is also very, very powerful. And again, if your design respects the design principles. At the end of these design reviews, you should always end with a decision. And the decision in most of the cases is, shall we continue this project further, or among these 4 options, which one are we going to pick to bring further? In the specifics of this context, in the next class, basically the goal of the next presentation is just to convince me that you deserve a 6. Okay, so you should leave the room with trying to convince me that you have done the perfect work. Okay, so but in most of the cases, when you work in the industry, you should convince your boss that your salary is well deserved. Convince him or her that you should continue working on the stuff for another number of months, and that they need to convince that they should invest more money, perhaps. If you're in a startup, you should probably convince the stakeholders that they should finance your startup and they give you another round of funding. And oftentimes we underestimate the comments that are coming from the audience. Today as well, we have seen like a few examples of back and forth between the audience that wasn't like very well perceived. I mean, sometimes you see like as an emotional reaction, irritation. Why are you asking me this question? Isn't like everything clear in what I'm presenting? We should always try to approach this in a constructive manner. We should try to take all feedback as good feedback. If people have questions or they haven't understood, it's probably because we haven't done like a great job presenting it. So we should try to provide responses for as much as we can, okay? And winning the consensus from the audience is very, very important, because there might be in the design review one person that actually is the boss or the main stakeholder, but also the opinion of others matters a lot when you work in the industry, when you're out there. And so it's not just a matter of convincing that one person, but it's also important to convince all the others, okay? And as an example of that, next week we are also going to play this kind of game. Because yes, I'm going to assign you like a grade for your work, but also there is a bonus if you win the consensus of the audience, okay? And we are going to talk about this in the next few slides. So I'm going to show that if you really please the audience, your colleagues, then if they like your presentation, then you can win a bonus. When you do design reviews, you should try to set like the right tone in the conversation. Okay, so you should take it constructively and professionally. There is always room for improvement on whatever you're working on, and you should not take it personally. And although I mean this is sometimes it's quite difficult, because especially if you have been working on something for a few months, you feel like quite attached to that something. You have spent like hours, days working on a design, and then somebody tells you, I don't like it that much. Sometimes it's hard to take, okay? But we need to always think that the feedback that we are getting is not about ourselves, it's about our design, okay? And so it's not like a referendum on whether you're a good or a bad person. It's just like feedback on your work. And there is always room for improvement. So typically the reviewers in these design reviews are looking at the fact that data and results supports the conclusions, whether the design satisfied the requirements they had in mind, whether the design methods were appropriate, and whether there are like some remaining problems that they need to be solved. So if you have these elements in the presentation, if you're talking about these things, if you provide like support for the kind of things that typically reviewers will be looking for, then you're probably making like the life of the reviewers easy when they look at your presentation. Take also the minutes of these presentations. Perhaps not for next week, but in general, if you do a design review, it's a very good idea to write down the minutes or to record what happens in the meeting, because oftentimes you need to go back to the rationale that was followed in those meetings to take those decisions. And obviously, in the presentation deck that you have, probably you don't have time to go in all the details, but what might happen is that in one of the follow-up questions that you get at the end of the presentation, you might need some supporting slides. And so if you have like additional documents or resources at the very end of the presentation, this can be quite useful to answer those questions. In addition to that, if you link the protocol, the screener, the recording, and the notes, this is quite useful, because sometimes these PowerPoints or these keynotes are used as archival material to show basically the progress between different stages of the project. And so if you link to the specific documents that you have used for that particular segment of the work, it's quite useful to go back to this stuff, modify, improve, and iterate. Okay, questions? All right, so let's talk about what's happening next week. Okay. So basically, for next week, you are supposed to just deliver like slides as the assignment. So all the groups should upload either a PowerPoint or a keynote to Moodle, okay, or like a PDF containing the slides. In addition to that, you also need time to practice your speech multiple times, because we have seen how that is important, right? And it's going to be evaluated, okay? So take some time as a group, basically, to rehearse, perhaps record yourself while you are presenting, watch together, basically, your presentation, and just discuss what can be improved and give each other's constructive feedback on stuff that can be done to improve the respective parts of the presentation. And rehearse, because as we have seen, hopefully you will not show up with pieces of papers and notes like in your hands for next week, okay? So what are the necessary elements that will be required for next week? First, I would like to see basically how you conducted research, how you applied basically the research to provide an answer to your project. Essentially, that you went through a user-centric development process following the methodology that we have seen in class, and that you have done this correctly, right? So that you identified the design opportunities, which means this, reaching out these design goals and designing for these goals. Design that solution that actually meets those goals in a way that provides like a solution to the identified problems. That you have tested the design in a thorough manner, so using the methodology that we have discussed here, and that you reach conclusion that will help basically improve the user experience of your users. And also finally, that you present your work effectively, that you actually will deliver this final presentation in a way that actually is very powerful, okay? So obviously some of these points have been already covered by the other deliverables that you have done, and next week will be especially about like point number 5, okay?
What do you mean that you conduct the research? What do you want to see?
Conduct the research means that you have done the interviews, that you have done like the questionnaires.
Yeah, so if I present the interviews, I don't need to present the research question and I forgot that thing.
Well,
the research question and
design goals?
No, the first thing was the research question. For example, research question. I don't need to present it.
I mean, I think you should probably motivate how you approach the formative research, right? And what is the best way to approach that? Not saying basically what kind of data you were trying to get out of it. I mean, in the end, yes, presenting the research question is quite important, I would say. So we did this because we wanted to learn what, maybe you don't need to phrase it as a question, but you need to explain why you conducted the formative research in the first place.
Yeah, because I wanted to spend more time in showing the interviews. That's why I think.
Sure. I mean, you can decide how to use this 15 minutes in the way you actually prefer. You can also spend the whole 13 minutes on the findings, but it's up to you. But I think in the end, you want to show that you did all this work, right? And so, again, it's an opportunity cost. If you spend too much time on one part, you're missing on some other parts, right? So the final presentation should be a recap of the project. So you should talk about the assumptions that you have, the formative research that you have done, the design implication or design goals, if you prefer. Present the solutions. Some of you guys have asked me whether you should present the whole 5 different designs that you have done during the sketching part. The answer is no. I mean, you should probably present only one, but all the others go into the D3 report. Okay. Present the design solution and explain how this design fixes the problem that you have observed in the formative research. Then the tests, and then the conclusions that you draw out of that, right? And so the point is that you should convince the audience that the approach is correct. I mean, that you follow the user-centric development process, okay? And this point, right? I talked this at length. What you should pay attention to, research methods should be appropriate. I mean, all the stuff that we basically have seen for the various deliverables also should be reflected on the final presentation. If you can make reference to the design principle, that would be great. Yeah, and this is already in the previous one. Okay, so how much time to present? 13 minutes total per group. That will be strictly enforced. You can do in this 13 minutes whatever you like. You can present in French or English. Doesn't really matter. Your slides can be in French or English. But don't mix the 2 languages, okay? Because otherwise it's a strange mix that doesn't make much sense. Also, if you have like one of the team members that is not really fluent in the language, I mean, try to find like the best agreement on which language actually makes more sense to present with, right? So I'll let you guys decide this, but don't change from one to the other during the presentation. So you should use like 2 minutes at the end. That is on top of the 13, so that's a total of 15 minutes. And these 2 final minutes are to answer questions from the public. Okay, so it's also a chance to win the favor of the audience, basically. Okay, and then basically what happens at the end of these 15 minutes, the group that is presenting leaves the room for 3 minutes. During this time, basically, the others relax. I take these 3 minutes basically to write some notes down that will help me remember afterwards how the presentation went. And then once I'm done, basically the group is asked to re-enter the room to attend the other presentations, okay? So there are like additional material that you might want to have a look at. This is the evaluation grid for the final presentation. And the examples that I was mentioning, 2016 and 2017, you can see both the deck, the presentation deck, and the videos. This is the room, and we will start at 2:15 and we will finish it around at 6 p.m. I mean, it's a long process. Maybe we will finish earlier, I don't know. But we will have to go through all the presentations. This is like the order. Is this the right one?
Why is that not updated? I did change it, it's just not pushed through for some reason.
Okay, wait, let me just refresh. Oh, yes. Okay, yes, so this is the order. So we will start with the enterprise teams because we have invited attendees that will have to be here for these presentations. So we will begin with them so that later our attendees can leave, and then we will continue with the other groups. And then there will be like this final vote and peer evaluation at the very beginning, at the very end. So about that, essentially, the bonus is about like 0.3 points that gets added on top of your capstone project grade. So this is capstone project, as you know, accounts for 45% of the final note. So if you take like a 6 in the capstone project, it accounts for 2.7 points in the final note. if you get like the bonus points, you can go up to 3 points for the final note. But there are like some rules, 3 rules actually, not 2. You cannot vote for yourself, obviously. You can vote for the group or for the work that you consider most meaningful, and you should not show your votes to other people saying, you know, I voted for you, now you vote for me, because that's not very professional. Okay? Questions? No questions? Everything super clear? Okay? So I wish you a great week. Good luck.
The greatest week.
But think about that. I mean, after this week, you're done, and then it's Christmas, right? Yeah. But there is Christmas first, and then exams.